You are now tuned into Flipping the Birds, a Philly Sports Network podcast.
What's going on, Eagles fans? Welcome one, welcome all to another episode of Flipping the Birds.
He's into the end zone. Touchdown, Eagles.
What's going on, Eagles fans? Welcome one, welcome all to another episode of Flipping the Birds. I'm Brian Cameron alongside David Neese, and we are here to recap the crazy NFL trade deadline. I think Adam Schefter tweeted out that this was like a record high from the last record that they had, and probably they went from 5 to 6, whatever the case may be. But nonetheless, the Eagles were active during their bye week. They did make 3 significant trades. But before we get to there, I know this is going to be a loaded question, but how are you feeling today, sir?
I'm doing great. We'll avoid the part we talked about off camera. Yeah, I'm feeling wonderful.
Sounds good to me. All right, so Eagles made 3 significant trades, and we spoke about the significance of them getting an edge rusher last week, which they answered. We spoke about previously about them getting a cornerback, which they answered twice. The first trade that they made during the bye week was for Michael Carter, and they made a trade with the Jets. They got Michael Carter the second, and a 2027 7th round pick from the Jets for wide receiver John Mechie the third, and a 2027 6th round pick. What is your thoughts on this first move that they made? Carter, I think, significantly have been a slot corner for most of his career. How do you feel like he will impact this defense?
Yeah, I think it's a twofold why they got him. I mean, for one, I think it's just because they had very little depth at the position of slot corner. They probably are underwhelmed maybe with the development of Mac McWilliams to this point, which is not an indictment on him. I mean, it's a tough job to learn like that, and he really wasn't expected to have to play significant snaps there. And I think the second part of that is if Michael Carter can show what he did a couple of years ago, then it could allow the Eagles to move Cooper DeJean outside if they feel that's necessary going down the stretch. I hate to do that because I think Cooper is just phenomenal in the role he's in, but it does give them the flexibility to do that, and that was probably the reason for the deal as much as depth. It just gives them so many more options in the event that it's needed.
Yeah, and prior to the trade, Vic Fangio alluded to how important Cooper is in the slot. I just want to say slot receiver in the nickel position. He's pretty much the heartbeat of the defense. You actually think about it, just because he's that versatile chess piece that so many people alluded to during the draft process, where they Cooper was the guy that you could actually move around in that draft class, and he was a key component in the Super Bowl run. And when this trade happened, it threw me off a little bit because I felt like they were going against what Vic had initially said about Cooper's position. And I think even in the chat we spoke about, like, can Michael Carter actually bounce outside, or are we going to see Cooper bounce outside as opposed to him? But this does give them a little bit of versatility because of the next move that they made, which I feel like which is a bit of an overstatement, more of a controversial move, just because a lot of people were very much in disagreement about the trade. The Eagles ended up trading a 2026 6th round pick to the Baltimore Ravens in exchange for cornerback Jair Alexander and a 7th round pick in 2027. I love this move. I think you actually wrote about it during the summertime that the Eagles should sign him. Liam wrote about it as well. We've spoken about it previously. Like, this to me was the move they should have made in the summertime. And I feel like it's unfair how people are analyzing this move. Jair Alexander's coming off a year where he was injured. During the season, during the offseason, he was released by the Packers. He was signed in June by the Ravens. And throughout training camp, did have to nurse himself back to health, and hasn't had a chance to really get his feet underneath him. If I'm not mistaken, currently, if we want to look at stats, he's had 5 targets on the season, 5 receptions allowed, and I think it's like over 100 yards. But this is like this feels like Darius Slay all over again with Quinion. Like this is a veteran that you're putting along on the opposite side of Quinion Mitchell, alongside Cooper DeJean, that can actually get the job done. And I feel like this could be a kind of a rejuvenation period for Jair Alexander. He's reunited with Christian Parker. He's teaming up with Quinion, with Cooper, with Vic Fangio. Like we could see a different version of what Baltimore saw. And Baltimore, to be honest, didn't give Jair Alexander, I feel like the runway he needed to succeed.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to his knee, I think. If he can, get back to any semblance of the player he used to be, then it's a win. And it's a low risk signing. I mean, I mean, trade. There was no reason not to do it. I mean, what was it? A pick swap? Is that what it ended up
20
being?
a seventh rounder for a sixth rounder, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. I mean, and this is a guy who, even if he cannot do what a lot of people hope he can do on the field, he's a former team captain in a room that was kind of, void of having that type of talent. Almost everybody in there except for Adoree is really young. Cooper, Quinion, both second-year players. Mac McWilliams, a first-year player. Keely Ringo, very young. I think he's 22 years old still. So it brings, a guy who's, been a former team captain, someone who's played in 80 regular season games, 7 postseason games. I mean, it brings a lot of experience to the room, even if he can't do what he used to do on the field. But I do think that they'll at least give him a look. I mean, and again, kind of like we were saying about Michael Carter, you have options. You have Ringo, you have Jacorian Bennett coming back, you have Jair Alexander. And, it's not a perfect situation, but if one of them hit, it's going to look pretty brilliant at the end of the season here, because they've kind of stockpiled, players who have potential at a weakness that, has been exposed at times this season. And Fangio has tried to hide a lot of it, but at this point, it was probably time, to try to do something like this. It might not have even have been their first option. I'm sure they looked at other players, but again, the experience that he has, like you mentioned with Slay, he came to here with a lot of experience, and everybody in that room listened to him. Last year, when I was speaking to Quinion and Cooper, they just could not talk enough about how much development they had under Slay. And that's an important thing that a lot of people, kind of dismiss, much like Brandon Graham coming in and taking Jahad Campbell under his wing now. And people say, oh, he could have done that, as a coach or something like that, but it isn't the same when you're in the locker room with the guys 24/7 on the field, traveling with them, sitting in the same spots, you're next to them in the locker. It's completely different. So I'm excited about the signing, just for, if nothing else, just the amount of intel and experience he can share with that young room.
And I think that's key, right? Like you mentioned Brandon Graham coming back, and this defense, it's been a good defense, right? They've been solid, but they've been missing that punch you in the mouth attitude, that swagger that they had last season. And to be honest, they had that swagger because they had a guy like Darius Slay in the secondary, which I know fans hated the fact that Slay had a podcast or Slay was vocal, whatever the case may be, right? They hate the fact that he's a human being at this rate. But Brandon Graham was literally Slay, but for the defensive line. And BG's always been the type to talk, mouths off. He's actually a joy to interview in the locker room, and he's been that vocal leader. So now you have Jair Alexander come into a secondary where Coop is kind of quiet, Quinon's kind of quiet, Reed is Reed. CJ Gardner-Johnson is no longer here. Darius Slay is no longer here. And we all know Jair Alexander has a mouth on him. He has that swagger to him. He has that attitude. He's the type of player you want to put against Justin Jefferson in his prime. You want to put him against Devontae Adams or Puka Nacua. Like, this is the right move for this exact moment of this team season. Just because you're bringing swagger back to a defense that had that last season and carried them to the Super Bowl. So I think I'm setting the expectations of this trade a little bit too high, but I feel like I just like it because it's, if you're gonna bounce back, this is literally the place you want to bounce back in, just because everything's going right on this defense, from the coaches, from the players. Like, it's a great culture for a guy like Jair Alexander to be in, because he's still recouping from that injury.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point. All of those players that you mentioned, they are quiet. They're very quiet. They
Yeah.
when you go in there, you hear Brandon from 100 yards away. Like everybody else, you have to ask them to speak up when you're talking to them because they are just not the same type of person. So you're right. Having another person like that on the team and the swagger that, we saw what happened when they lost, CJ a year before. Both years
Mhm.
he's been here, they went to the Super Bowl, and it's not just because of his play; it's also just the bravado. It's just, and him and Brandon Graham and like you said, Jair, they're built a little differently as far as personality goes, and that kind of stuff carries teams because the Eagles in general are kind of quiet. Jalen
Mhm.
Hurts is pretty quiet. I mean, almost everybody in that locker room. It's a lot different than I think people think. There's a handful of people who kind of do almost all of the talking amongst the 53 guys in that room. So yeah, I think it is important to bring somebody not just vocal, but somebody who has that wealth of knowledge like he does as well.
And it feels like that's kind of why like the media picks on AJ because Smitty's quiet. Like you said, Jalen's quiet. Saquon talks, but Saquon talks in a very how can I say this? Very
Calculated.
yeah, he's very strategic with everything he says. Every time he talks, I'm always listening just because like Saquon gives you everything you want to hear, but he gives it to you the right way.
Yeah.
AJ gives you everything from the heart because that's who he is. He's a passionate player, and this has been the one topic that's been picked on by the media is that AJ was going to leave, AJ was going to be traded. Patriots are after AJ, but he's still here. Deadline is passed. AJ Brown is an Eagle. Howie Roseman even alluded to the fact that he's a captain. This is not a guy you just trade away, just to trade away. They're not in the business of giving away great players when they want to be a great team doing great things. And I feel like that's something that we've spoken highly of all season so far. And I hate to derail the conversation to AJ Brown, but it's just it's
Well, it
just
was
mind
relevant
blowing.
today. You're
Yeah.
right. How he brought it up, when the media asked him, he brought up, like you said, he wears a C on his chest for a reason. He's an important part of the team, the organization. He cares about winning, his teammates. I think his exact quote was, "I think that when you're a team like ours that is looking for an opportunity to compete for a championship, you just don't get rid of a guy like that. We're lucky to have him on the team, excited for the second half with them." And I catch a lot of flack of it online, but the players do not view him the way the fans do.
Mm-mm.
Everybody gravitates towards him in that locker room, and most of them seemingly think like him. Like Devontae's come out and basically said the same thing. Like, I think the same way he does. I don't think anything he said is wrong. They say little things like that. They don't want to quite go down the same rabbit hole he has as far as, posting and everything. But like you said, that's him. That's his personality. That's what he's going to do. Most of it's rooted in positivity, despite the way it looks. So I'm extremely happy he's still here because especially with them starting to do more plays under center, I'm really excited to see how that's going to work out. But that's for when we get to the Green Bay game.
Yeah, I
We
think it's
still got
good.
one big one that somebody on this podcast last week really beat the table for.
I'm getting there. I'm gonna get there. Just to piggyback on the AJ talk, I think one thing that I realized when you're speaking is that he's the vocal leader for the offense. Like Jalen's the internal vocal leader. He's the guy that you're never going to hear about as a fan or as a media because everything's internal with Jalen. But I remember the game that the first year that they went to the Super Bowl with Jalen. It was the Saints game. Nick didn't let Jalen play because of the knee injury, so they started Gardner Minshew, and it came down to the wire. But the Eagles ended up losing that game. When the media came to the locker room, AJ called everybody to him. He wanted to answer every single question for Gardner Minshew. He wanted to take all that burden away from the backup quarterback who didn't deserve it. So AJ literally stood up, dressed up, tall, and accepted every single question that was coming his way. So AJ, it's just mind blowing to see how many people want to tear him down just for him being honest and for him being passionate. But this is the guy that actually does breathe and live Philadelphia football, and that's a key thing that this team needs going down the stretch to another Super Bowl run. Excuse me. Another trade that they made, like David was alluding to, was that they traded a third round pick in exchange for Jaelan Phillips of the Miami Dolphins. Jaelan Phillips is a player that I feel like was going to blow up. He was going to be a guy he was on the ascending star with Miami during Vic's time over there. if I'm not mistaken, I think it was 2023 or 2024. He had 6 games. In 6 games, he had already had 6.5 sacks, and he was on a upward trend where it seemed like this guy was going to be the next big thing in the league when it came to the pass rushing. But he's dealt with injuries ever since. But he's a guy that as an edge rusher, we could really truly depend on. Somebody that could be in rotation with Nolan Smith, Jalen Hunt, Brandon Graham, and he's definitely a guy that's going to make a huge difference. JFiz does have a question in the chat saying, do you trust that we have enough pass rush to take advantage of the QBs we'll face in the playoffs? And I think adding a guy like Jaelan Phillips, adding Nolan Smith back from IR, adding Brandon Graham, having Jalen Hunt, who's actually come into his own, it's gonna be a really, really good front. How did you feel about the Jaelan Phillips trade? Were you jumping up and down like I was? Because I was ecstatic for the bragging rights of it.
Yeah, I mean, you called that. I mean, that was perfect. But yeah, I was extremely excited even after seeing the compensation. Some people, think, oh, we spent a third on a 9-week rental. Well, they really like him. And the intent is to try to extend him. And people say, oh, they can't afford him. Well, it seems like he's probably in that 12 to $15 million a season range if he, stays healthy and everything works out. And when has Howie not been able to pay somebody $12 million if he wants to keep them on this team? I mean, they're in a Super Bowl window right now. He's the perfect, fit. He's excelled under Fangio, which is already, pretty important stuff. And when you look at the two guys, Patrick Johnson was released today. Aziz is on IR. So 2 weeks ago when they were playing, you had Patrick and Aziz, or 3 weeks, and now those two guys are Jaelan Phillips and Brandon Graham. You have significantly raised the floor. I mean, the ceiling we'll see, but they now have, gone from, a position that was depleted to making it a strength. And in addition to Jaelan and Brandon, you're about to get Nolan Smith back, whose practice window was just open. So the pass rushers are Nolan Smith, Jaelan Phillips, Jalen Hunt, Josh Uche, and Brandon Graham is at the bottom there. Whereas before, that bottom was Patrick Johnson and Aziz. So you have unquestionably raised the floor. So yeah, I do think they have a lot. The key, and I beat this to death as well. The key for the edge rushers is Jalen Carter looking like he did last season. If he steps back up and just clogs the middle, and they keep getting the type of improvement they have from Ajomo, those edge rushers are going to feast. But he's not quite where he was last season yet. But when he gets there, look out, because everything will start working like that. And fans, especially in this day and age, with lots of people just so impatient, they want everything to be perfect from week one. But that's not how this works, and that's not how the Eagles work. It's a process, and they want to be hitting on all cylinders in January and February. And as you see, the product keeps improving week after week after week. And the offense has, it was a new team, new coordinators, new guys, even for Fangio, there's a lot of new players on there. He lost a starting safety, a starting corner, 2 edge rushers, and Dean was out. And, we barely touched on that, but he makes a huge difference in base against the run. I mean, so yeah, I think this has all come together beautifully. I love the move for Jaelan Phillips. The only other player who I would have been more excited to get, quite honestly, in this trade market was Myles Garrett. that was about it. And outside of paying 3 first round picks, which apparently was basically what Howie was, seemingly willing to, pay for that. This is a great move. Oh, and what I wanted to say about the compensation. So they do a 3rd round pick. Even if he leaves, which is almost a 4th round pick, let's be honest. It's it's at the end. Even if he leaves a year later, he'll be part of the compensation formula. And if he signs in that $12 to $15 million range, they're going to get a 4th back. So worst case scenarios, they did a pick swap from a 4th to a 3rd. You wait a year, which Howie never cares about doing, because you just saw how that plays into his hand, because we just spent the, our 3rd round pick and saved the Jets' 3rd round pick from Hassan Reddick, which other teams wouldn't have done what he did. He had to wait 2 years to get the payoff. But look what it just did. It just brought Jaelan Phillips in here.
And you mentioned to the fact that they like Jaelan Phillips, right? Like how we alluded to the fact that when he was coming out of college, they dug deep into him. Like he alluded to Phillips having coming from a great family, being a good kid, being great for the community. And if we're being honest, like they don't really have that fierce edge rusher right now. Like I doubt BG comes back for another year, right?
Right.
Nolan Smith will probably pick up his option. Jalen Carter pick up his option. Um, or extend Jalen Carter. But still, they need somebody like Phillips, and I wouldn't put it past Howie to figure it out at the end of the season. Like we're keeping this guy here, we'll maneuver this way, and then they'll have a continuity on the defensive line that they could keep all four of Davis, Carter, Smith, and Phillips. And Phillips, John Clark caught up with him in the airport, and he said, this is he would literally not want to be anywhere else but here. So the guys are ready, like invested in this. Vic Fangio, we know he has a huge say on what happens with his side of the team. So I
Yeah.
don't see them allowing Phillips to slip. But if they do, like you mentioned, they're coming up with a comp pick one way or another. Is the way that the trade deadline went? Are you satisfied going forward? Do you feel like this team has put the best the best I say the best team to make a deep run in the playoffs? Like, is this the best that they could have done? Besides Miles
The,
Garrett, because we all know that would have
right.
broken the
Yeah.
internet and the world.
I mean, all the moves were improving the defense, which arguably was already, a little bit ahead of the offense, not necessarily in terms of talent, but just on play on the field. But if I was nitpicking, I would have thought that they may have tried to get a tight end, just
Mhm.
because if something happens to Dallas Goddard and he has average missing like 5 to 6 games a season, they really have very little behind him, and he is so integral on the run game as well. His run
Mhm.
blocking is highly underrated. I mean, I don't remember what the stats were last season when he is in the game and when he's not, but they're running. I mean, it's something like 2 more yards per game. I mean, per carry. I mean, it's incredibly different. And people will say, "Oh, well, they already had Calcaterra who can catch and this and that." But do they? I mean, when Dallas isn't in the game, how many catches have the Eagles ever had from the tight end position? Two. I
Yes.
mean, so I do think it's a weakness there, just from the depth standpoint, and also they maybe could have tried to get a little stronger on the offensive line, but I think that they're going to trust Stoutland there through and through, and you saw what happened with Brett Toth after he had a full week to play at center. So they know how the health of Jurgens is a lot better than we do. So if they think he's coming back and Toth goes back into that role, and they know how much sooner Drew Kendall will be able to play on the line. They know a lot more of that than we are, because even at practice, even if you watch practice, you don't see much because they don't practice with the ones.
Mhm.
So it's just not the same. It's just very hard to gauge for, any outsider to have an informed opinion about that. So you have to trust Outland through and through. But yeah, if I was nitpicking, just depth at OL and at tight end.
Yeah, I think I agree with you that on that one. I was actually pretty curious that they didn't make a move for offensive lineman, but I saw, also didn't see the value in trading a value pick for an offensive lineman. I know a lot of people were hell bent on getting Jackson Powers Johnson. I think I thought that would have been a solid move, but we have Cam Jurgens for the long run, so you would have to move him to guard, and I think it would have been too much of a project in season. Um,
Unless it was to remove Steen from the starters.
Correct. And I feel like it's weird because like I personally feel like he's the one, like he's the weakest link, but I feel like he's been the strongest offensive lineman this season alongside Jordan Mailata. Like he's been healthy. I think he's been putting up good numbers according to PFF. He's been good. He's been quiet, which is it's we're just so used to greatness out of this offensive line that we're looking for the one difference that's a part of this unit right now.
He's been
Um,
really good in pass pro. If
yes.
anything to nitpick, it would be his run blocking. But he was never going to be able to do what Makai Becton could. He's just not that size of a man. But he does thrive in pass pro, whereas Makai struggled a little bit more. He was much better in the run. So it's been a change there, which is probably a big reason why the Eagles have had a little difficulty running the ball as well to start the season, and in addition to the injuries like you mentioned, Lane's been in and out a couple games, Dickerson was playing when he probably shouldn't.
Mhm.
Jurgens had off-season surgery. Mailata, without Dickerson right beside him, suddenly looks a little more vulnerable. It's just, snowball effect there. But yeah, and again, that's nitpicking. I think they're fine
Yeah,
at OL. If I
yeah,
had to just choose one, it'd be tight end. I would have liked to have seen them try to upgrade the position there. But again, it takes two to tango there, and they might not have had anywhere to go.
yeah. And I think Steen has been quietly the MVP of the O line. Do you think there's a tight end that they get off of waivers coming up?
I don't know. I no nobody that I see that probably would be much better than
Yeah,
Calcaterra, unless it's a health reason with him, which he's been banged up some too.
and he has
So
the bad concussion history as well.
yeah, so that would be the only reason, because like I said, you're a couple plays away from literally having nothing at the position.
Yeah, it's a scary thought, but here's to Dallas Goedert having a full healthy season for I think like the first time in his career, or maybe the second time in his
Yeah, I
career.
mean, he's already got 7 touchdowns. His previous season high was 5. I mean, it's funny how when a guy knows it's his final season, he's about to go into free agency, how well they play and how healthy they stay.
All
So,
of a sudden, right?
yeah.
um, Eagles. So the Eagles will be facing the Packers come Monday. We won't so much preview the game. It's a bit of a short show today. But what are your key factors entering that game for Philadelphia coming off a bye with the addition of these key pieces?
Yeah, I mean, to start with the defense, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how quickly Jaelan Phillips, is able to integrate himself into the defense. It's a huge advantage that he already knows Fangio's system. So it's not like getting somebody completely, cold off the street who hasn't played that. He knows a lot of the terminology, even though some of it's been tweaked just from team to team. It's still the same stuff. He's going to know how to do all of that. Brandon Graham's had a couple weeks. The linebacking core, I think they're starting to figure that out. You basically try to keep Dean on obvious running downs and bring Jihad in for anything outside of that on third and long, and Jihad goes back to being a linebacker. He's had to play a lot of snaps at edge and try to do pass rushing, so much so that Fangio said he couldn't even get him on the field much because of he was just over inundated with information, and he just you can't put somebody on the field when they're not comfortable with it yet. So it'll be good for his development as well to get him back to what he was doing. And the unfortunate loss of the Green Bay tight end Tucker kind of makes the defense's job a lot easier. I think Fangio will try to do what he always does to quarterbacks and make them, he tightens the field. He's held the last 2 components to, I think, 1 touchdown in the red zone and 11 trips. He's going to try to make Jordan Love, whose athleticism and talent, especially when plays break down, is his highlight. He'll try to force him to play patient football, something that he struggles doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, they're looking for key turnovers. And so I think defensively, I liked what they did last year when they played them both times. And I think, it's not much different except for the fact that, Green Bay is probably a little less manned right now due to Tucker.
I completely agree with that, and they're coming off a pretty rough loss against the Panthers, and you have
Yeah.
Mike Parsons kind of calling out the offense as well, which it raises eyebrows, right? But nonetheless, I hate to say this, but I don't think they're an overrated team. I think they're a team that's being put on a pedestal way before they're prepared to be. A lot of people were ready to crown them the kings of the NFC, and they went ahead and lost to the Panthers. But Jordan Love has been a very up and down quarterback. He's played good football against the Eagles. But the Eagles, I feel like they've had his number for quite some time. I'm curious to see how the offense is going to look against this Packers defense. Micah's going to do Micah things. It's going to be interesting to see if we see the Eagles continuing the trend of under center and how they incorporate AJ Brown into it. How they maximize his presence out there, and how Smitty eats off of it, Dotson, because it looks like they were coming into a zone where Jaelan was starting to trust Dotson being out there. Jaelan was starting to trust his offensive line a little bit more. could this be, how can I say this? Could this be the game that you feel like, cements the Eagles as one, if not one, but or the top dog in the NFC?
I do. I think history suggests that after the bye week, you saw it last year, they were able to completely make changes that, benefited the team. And I think they're on that same trajectory this time. They left, they went into the bye on a good note with Barkley having his first 100-yard game. He had it by halftime, but it was his first 100-yard game since the NFC Championship game versus
You
the
called that
Commanders.
breakout game.
Yeah, yeah, so if they're able to establish the run early and that opens up the middle of the field for Dallas Goedert, and then that opens up the outside for the receivers. I fully expect AJ Brown to be back. Hurts has been playing in really good rhythm and efficiency. It seems like Batulo finally has found that balance. What did he throw? 4 touchdowns last week? I mean, he was like 160 yards or whatever it
Yeah,
was, but
he was
four
efficient.
touchdowns. There's not a poison pill to this offense like there used to be. It used to be, you could blitz him and befuddle him. It just appears like over the past, 30 games or whatever, Jalen Hurts just has seen the field at an incredibly quick pace. It's just something that has developed, and his ball timing on the outside with both AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, hell, even Jahan. I
Hmm.
mean, it's been perfect. So I do think this is where they solidified themselves as the team to beat. You can keep throwing other contenders in there, the Niners, but they have their own problems. Unfortunately, they just lost Mekhi Williams. The Rams, who I think
Everybody's
Puka.
really riding their coattails as the team to beat as well. Like they've been praising the Rams and the Packers this season. Like they've
Yeah,
accomplished so much.
I mean, if I had to pick one, I think the Rams are just a little more challenging because of the quarterback position. Matthew Stafford can beat you
Hmm.
at any given time. I mean, he's just, just so dangerous back there and so knowledgeable. But yeah, I think this is the game where they, go up to Lambeau, and on a Monday Night Football. They know what everybody's given them now. They've, the whole season they've had to take every team's best shot because they're the Super
Hmm.
Bowl champion. They're going to do it again on, Monday. I wouldn't expect to see the same team that you saw, the Packers when they went against Carolina. But the Eagles are prepared for this. And again, with that extra week off, the defense is going to have new wrinkles that nobody's seen yet. The offense is just keep evolving, and I think you will see more under center. You're going to see more crossing routes. You'll probably see more digs. And then, that'll set up deep shots. So we pounded and pounded on this show the whole season so far that once they established that offensive line and could get the run game going, it was going to open up everything else. And that's what you're seeing. When they tried to take it away, Jalen killed them with his arm for 4 touchdowns. So they're a very hard team to beat unless they're beating themselves.
And that's gonna be the key thing, right? Is Philadelphia to come into this game well rested and being able to avoid the downfall of beating themselves like they've done, quite some time and putting themselves in a bit of a hole. Um, the ultimate question is gonna be, what is your prediction for the score of this game?
I went Eagles offense with 30 points. I think what did they scored 72 the past 2 weeks, like 38. And
Mhm.
yeah, so yeah, I'm going 30 points, and I went with 20 for the Packers. And again, I kind of did that with, the last game as well, where I just see a kind of a late touchdown, kind of like what happened with the Giants. They score a meaningless fourth quarter touchdown because the Eagles have learned to start putting backups in. So
Mhm.
something that I wish the Commanders had done when they were getting
Yeah.
walloped the other night. Because it's sad to see. I know we all want to win, but you don't want to do it like that. You don't want to see
No.
somebody like Jaden Daniels. He's a superior talent. Fun to watch. He's gone through struggles this year already, and to just be in a game like that for no reason and then get injured in the way he did is very disappointing. Not only for them, but for the parity of the league.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised that Dan Quinn, being the veteran that he is, actually let his quarterback stay in the game this long. He did mention that on that drive that they were going to take him out, but hindsight is 2020, so we don't know what the actual truth is. But
Right. But the Eagles have been doing that. Like that's why
yeah.
they gave up that touchdown against the Giants. It was basically all backups in there, on the defense. And that's smart. And it keeps guys fresh. It keeps them healthy. It gives the young guys a little taste of play, a little action in case they are needed later. They're not coming in as wide-eyed as they once would be.
Hmm.
So, it's been really good. And the way the season's, coming along, I think last year the bye week came at kind of a perfect time. And I kind of think it did again this year. They've added key pieces that gives, that extra week to, integrate them into the team.
Yeah, I completely agree. And with the score, I also agree. I was gonna go for 34-21. I think Philly's just gonna edge them out just because I think they're gonna come into a zone where they have everything they need. Like it's right there in front of them to take. It's I don't want to say weaker, but I feel like past the Buccaneers and the Rams, the NFC just kind of falls apart a bit. And if you get into the playoffs with home field advantage and you allow the Buccaneers and the Rams kind of beat themselves up for the NFC Championship game, like smooth sailing back to possibly repeating and taking on either the Chiefs or whoever comes out of there. What would you grade the trade deadline? Before
What did I think of it?
No, what would you grade it if you were to give Howie Roseman a grade? Because a lot of people have been saying that it was bad.
No, I think it's a solid B. I mean, they're just there wasn't a lot more to do, like I said, unless we're just nitpicking for a backup OL or tight end there. But again, you don't know what was available. We all see all this stuff on X, but you don't really know what's true and what isn't. And the Eagles didn't have a lot of late picks anymore. They have picks 1 through rounds 5. So anything they would have had to do would have taken, unless they're sending future picks, which a lot of teams just don't care about 2 years down the road.
Yeah.
Not everybody has the job security that Howie Roseman does where he can make moves like that. They need to win right now.
Yep.
So, unless you were giving up a 3 or a 4 to try to get like a Mike Mayer or a, Kyle Pitts kind of guy or whatever, it wasn't really much out there. So I do give it a B. I think they upgraded their weakest position, which was pass rush. And you ride with what you have here now. And you got, like you said, quality people too. This is a pillar of the community, Jaelan Phillips. This is a guy who does a lot of, work and donates a lot of his time and within the community. So it just fits the character that the Eagles have, which is a big reason why they're so good.
I'll give it an A+ just because we actually found evidence that Howie Roseman is a fan of the show and he does listen to our thoughts. So Howie, shout out to you. Thank you for listening today. But these are moves that I feel I would have made him mad in.
Yeah.
No, but Jaelan Phillips, I feel like it's gonna be great. I think pairing him with Jalen Hunt and Nolan Smith is gonna be freaking phenomenal. I'm very curious to see what's gonna happen with Jair Alexander and what version of him we do get. I don't want to overanalyze it. I don't want to be too happy about it, or be too down about it. I think it was a veteran move that they needed to make.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, the worst case scenario is he brought invaluable knowledge to a room of youngsters that will feed off of that. And he's a guy who's battle tested, a former team captain, outspoken. He's something that position lacks. And I love nothing more at cornerback than those finger wag swag people like Jalen Mills. You have to have it, and don't get it mistaken. Quinion has it. He just doesn't say it much off the field, but he runs it plenty on.
Yeah, he's a bit of a trash talker on the field from what we've been told by the other players.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing the secondary, and seeing what the Eagles are able to put against the Packers. We'll be back next Tuesday to kind of recap the game. To recap the Monday night game. Hopefully nobody out there has YouTube TV. If you do, I'm sorry. It's an ugly mess between them and Disney. But until then, I'm Brian Cameron alongside David Neeson. We're flipping the birds.
Flip.